Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and today we're going to be talking about Metroid Dread and why this game is probably going to go down as my favorite game of the year. I don't think the last 2 months of this year are going to change that. I think the experience I had with Metroid Dread is something special. It's something that's going to have a lasting impact, and I want to share in that hype and excitement with you because I'm just entirely in love with Metroid Dread. It's an incredible game. I just 100% beat it last night, and my first thought was, wow, that was amazing. I am so emotional, and this shows that Samus is right up there with the best, but also, I want to continue playing. I want to continue enjoying this experience, so I will be starting hard mode really soon, because the game is just fun to play. It's fun to replay from what I've understood so far. It's an incredible experience. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just everything about Metroid Dread and what makes it so special, why it's something that's worth its value, and why I think this could be the beginning of a Metroid renaissance potentially. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. Now, before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So I'll just give you fair warning right now, there will be spoilers in this video, because I need to talk about everything about this game, and that will include talking about some epic boss fights, that will include talking about some awesome power-ups, and that will include talking about some incredible story beats that I think are highly satisfying to longtime Metroid fans, and potentially still pretty cool for new Metroid fans as well. So yes, there will be spoilers in this video, so you have been warned. Now, where should we start? Let's talk about the overall structure of this game. It's incredible. I get the sense that this game has been expertly crafted. It feels like Nintendo and the Metroid series director Yoshio Sakamoto and Mercury Steam are the perfect marriage here in terms of the proper talent to make a 2D Metroid game, because what's going on here is just something that to me is a little mind-blowing, honestly. So if you don't understand what Metroidvania is, it's basically these 2D style games where you can go left and right, up and down diagonally in these bigger worlds, and there's a lot of backtracking. As you progress, you obtain power-ups that allow you to do different things in different areas, and you get these aha moments, right? Because you'll be exploring the environment, you'll see this tall cliff or something, or this weird structure you can't break, but it feels like there's something special about it, but you just can't do something with it quite yet. But then you progress in the game, you acquire a couple different power-ups, and then all of a sudden you realize, wait, I can go back there now. There's something I can do there now with this awesome new power-up. So you do that, and then when you do that, you obtain another power-up, and that power-up, in conjunction with the power-up you had before, gives you even more options, and perhaps you'll have even more aha moments that will force you or compel you to go to different locations and try different things. And this is basically the Metroidvania experience, and Metroid Dread being one of the original sort of series to start off this whole Metroidvania genre. They do an incredible job with Metroid Dread. They've appropriately modernized the Metroidvania style, and I think they've done it just expertly, really. And what's sort of exciting about it is I actually think they designed this in a way where it's more open to Metroid newcomers, because what I realized is that, yes, I had repeated moments where I scratched my head and wondered, what do I do next? Where do I go next? What can I sort of do with the power-ups I have now? But then I find myself not too long afterwards headed in the right direction. So the game isn't linear. The game doesn't tell you where to go exactly. It does not hold your hand, which I really appreciate. The game respects your intelligence, but at the same time, the way everything's designed and structured, there is a bit of this very subtle funneling that goes on where you're sort of almost always headed in the right direction unless you intentionally choose to go a different direction. And that's also something exciting about this. The game rewards you for sequence breaking, which is something that I think is really important, because there's actually a pretty good amount of history here with the Metroid series and speedrunning and sequence breaking, and Mercury Steam has actually put in moments, programmed moments and cutscenes in this game that reward you for doing things like this. So One of the earlier boss fights in the game is with Kraid. You may have heard of Kraid because Kraid is an amazing boss fight, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what's interesting here is that you can actually acquire a few different power-ups before you get to Kraid that you're not necessarily supposed to. For example, the Morph Ball Bomb, and if you go fight Kraid, there's actually a point in the battle where you can use the Morph Ball Bomb to put yourself inside a cannon, and that will shoot you inside of Kraid, and then you can use a whole bunch of bombs to instantly kill him. And it's an entire cutscene here. This is not something that you would find normally. This is something that happens through sequence breaking. They actually programmed in, they animated an entire cutscene for a boss fight that causes an instant kill if you sequence break. They are rewarding you for going off the beaten track here. And that's just an incredible thing. It goes to show you just how expertly designed this world is. It's just an incredibly well-structured world, and I love it. I think they did an amazing job with it here. But this game's world is not just great because of its layout, but also because of just how it looks visually. Yes, Metroid Dread is a 2D Metroid game, but I feel it does sort of perhaps more better satisfy the definition of 2.5D. Because yes, there are 3D polygons all throughout. I mean, this is not a 2D sprite game, this is 3D visuals, but just from a 2D perspective. But there are a lot of moments where the camera pans out, or the camera pans in, or the camera goes behind the shoulder of Samus, where you get a lot of different perspectives of this environment, and you see it in 3D. There's a lot rendered here, and it's all very beautiful. There's a lot of variety. It's not just all one big scary space station, but there are forest areas and fire areas and water and ice areas, but then there's also cool ruins and palaces and things of that nature. There's a lot of variety to the environment, and what's also really cool is that the game also has an attention to detail where you can see things happening in the background a lot of the time, and it's sort of a subtle suggestion in terms of what's going to happen next. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of how this game sort of funnels you and steers you in the right direction. Oftentimes when you're exploring areas for the first time, you will see things happening in the background that could perhaps be hinting towards something that will be happening in the future. At the very least, it sort of helps to build up a bit more atmosphere and some cool foreshadowing as well. It's just a nice little touch to these environments that I really, really appreciate. But another amazing thing about this environment is just how well you move through it. The gameplay in Metroid Dread is stellar. I didn't expect it to feel quite this smooth, and I think a big part of the reason why it feels so smooth is one, is because the game is in 60 frames per second, but also two, because it's now controlled with an analog stick, no longer a D-pad. The game is designed with a modern controller in mind, unlike previous Metroid games that were all made for older systems. So you feel that difference here. It feels a lot more natural, a lot more organic, a lot more fluid. It's not just with the movement, but because you have more button options, there's a lot more things you can do, and it's spread out in a way that's very comfortable. But Samus just moves very quickly on top of that. They've offered up Samus some pretty nice abilities this time around that really speed up the gameplay and make it feel fluid and give you a lot of options in terms of what you can do this time around. This is the most powerful Samus we've ever seen in a 2D Metroid game, and she also has more options than ever before. Between the flash shift and the shine spark and the slide and the dash melee attack, there's just so much you can do here, and it's very, very satisfying. Samus feels powerful, so you can just blitz through enemies here, and it's amazing. Now, when I say blitz through enemies, she can do that, but there is still challenge. Enemies still offer up quite a bit of a challenge. There is a heavy emphasis on countering and parrying, and I appreciate that, but I know some people perhaps may feel, well, Metroid's more about shooting. But there's still plenty of shooting as well, so I feel like there's actually a decent balance here. You don't have to parry enemies, you can shoot them, but parrying does offer a nice advantage if you have good timing. If you don't have good timing, you will be punished by taking quite a hit here. And that sort of brings me to another interesting point. While the game may play beautifully well, it may feel very smooth and fluid, and it's like butter. It's just such a smooth thing. It feels great, but there is challenge. The game is very challenging, but not in a frustrating way, I don't think. A lot of times, yes, when I was exploring the world trying to figure out the puzzles and progress, I had moments where I would scratch my head, and then I would check the map. And the map is so beautifully detailed, there's so much you can do here. I think it might be the best map I've ever seen in a Metroid game, because you can see everything very clearly, it's very large, but you have icons that you can allow you to highlight sort of items where you can sort of seek out different particular items if you're looking for a particular item. You can set little beacons so you can know where to go or leave a clue for yourself later on. Like, it's very well put together, and there's a decent hit system involved, so the map does get the job done very nicely. But going back to the point, yes, there is a challenge with this game, with the puzzles, but I never found myself entirely frustrated. I always felt like the game would make me uncomfortable for a moment, but then I would adapt, I would figure it out, and I would push forward. The game doesn't let you be comfortable, so perhaps that may not fit with everyone, but for me, that's something that I really appreciate, because the game respects my intelligence, the game respects my ability, it does not hold my hand, it's not a cakewalk, but it's also not really frustrating, to the point I made earlier. Because this world is so expertly crafted, there is a bit of a funneling here, so you're in general sort of always headed in the right direction, and if you just sort of persevere a bit, you will find yourself progressing in this game with minimal frustration. There will probably be some depending on the player, but enough to the point where I feel like it's a healthy amount, because it is about puzzles. If every puzzle is easy, then there's not too much satisfaction there. But it's not just with the puzzles, but also the combat as well. As I brought up earlier, you have a lot of options this time around in terms of moving around and your combat options. There's just so much you can do, but it all has come together very nicely, very smoothly, and it makes the fighting in this game very exciting because it doesn't feel clunky, and if I die, it's because I wasn't good enough. And there is no enemy in the game where I feel like it's just entirely unforgiving, it's just not fair. No. You learn from the patterns of these enemies, and once you learn, you can take them out. Yes, they are challenging. Some of those patterns are hard to figure out. Yes, it requires that you demonstrate a decent ability with platforming and moving around to dodge these attacks, and also, being able to land the attacks, but as long as you persevere, you will learn, and you will triumph, and there is that great sense of satisfaction here. Yes, there are enemies that deal lots of damage, and the game does punish you for, well, taking a hit. But you also respond very quickly right beforehand, so you can just jump right back in. So the game doesn't punish you so much that you feel like, oh my god, now I have to slog through this entire area I already explored. No. When you die, you come back right before where you died pretty much. So the respawn points are very forgiving, and I think that helps to sort of balance out the high difficulty of this game. And because of that, well, you get through it with minimal frustration, I would say, and still have that great sense of satisfaction because you know that it was challenging and you still beat it. So I think they put together a nice balance here in terms of forgiving respawn points and patterns to learn, but just a tough difficulty to sort of manage. And I think it's a really nice balance here. I think this might be the best balanced Metroid game when it comes to difficulty. I hope they stick things to around this level moving forward. But on the note of difficulty and respawn points, I think we should talk about the Emmy now. Finally, the big sort of new set of enemies that Nintendo's heavily marketed here that are a big part to the Dread element for Metroid Dread. And what's exciting about the Emmy is that they are very similar to stalker characters we've seen, like for example, in the modern Resident Evil games. And that's a really awesome element in the Resident Evil games. But there are a few differences here. The stalker characters in Resident Evil are kind of slow, and as long as you move away, you'll be fine. And they're only in certain sections of the game, and once you progress past that point, you don't have to deal with them anymore. That threat is no longer there. But with Metroid Dread, throughout pretty much the entire experience until the very end, you have this constant sort of looming dread of the Emmy, because you will have to get through them again, you will have to interact with them. The Emmy aren't constantly following you throughout the entire map, but rather there are these zones that you have to go through where the Emmy are, and in those zones, they are there. and they do track you, and they can hear a pin drop and they will chase you down, and they are very hard to avoid. And when you do get hit by them, you have a very, very, very narrow and almost entirely random moment to parry them. It's very challenging to do, and when you do it, it's an exciting moment, and you feel like a boss, but most of the time you will fail and die. But you'll be respawned right before the Emmy zone, and so you can just jump right back in and try again. So to me, it's almost fun, it's almost arcade-like, because you can kind of go back at it again and try your best and see if you can triumph. So it's not frustrating, at least to me. But also, there is sort of that fear, that nervousness of being chased down, of always having to deal with this whenever you enter these zones. So they sort of satisfy the dread element, and it's all throughout the game. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, how the game continuously makes you uncomfortable. It continuously sort of compels you to adapt, to progress, to get better. And that's exciting to me. The game does not treat you like a baby. It is not a cakewalk. It does not hold your hand throughout the experience. It actually respects your intelligence and your ability to get better. But it also does it in a way that is somewhat forgiving with the respawn points, and it's still structured in a way where people can progress if they persevere. So I think it's a really, really nice balance here, and I think they did a great job with the Emmy. They're an exciting stalker character variant, and I look forward to playing through the game to try and get better at countering them and showing off just sequences of me countering the Emmy repeatedly or getting chased down. It's just a fun experience, which sort of brings me to another point here, which is when you get to use the Omega Cannon. And you get the Omega Cannon by fighting off these Mother Brain-like eye brain creatures, which is a nice throwback to old previous Metroid games. But once you get that Omega Cannon, the camera pulls behind you, and you can use this cannon to take out the Emmy. And that's also kind of stressful as well, because, well, they're chasing you down, and you don't have that much time to take them out, but you have to do before they get to you, or you run away. It's a nice little variation to the gameplay that does pull the camera behind you so you can see more 3D visuals. And it's just a really cool element that I think further satisfies that dread of the game. But before I continue on with this theme of dread, I want to talk about the boss fights in this game, because they are epic. Now, the Emmy aren't really boss fights in my opinion. They're a little different, but there are boss fights. There are these moments where you enter a chamber, perhaps you didn't intend to, but you'll fall through a hole, and then you'll see this beautiful cutscene play, and you'll see this large, massive creature, this behemoth you have to fight, and it's quite a set piece most of the time. It shows off Samus in a very badass, epic kind of way. The cutscenes are just brilliant, and when you fight these bosses, they are very satisfying, because yes, they are challenging, but there are these patterns, and you can adjust to them and get better and get good. And a lot of these bosses have moments that are unique. For example, I mentioned earlier how there is technically an option to one-shot Kraid if you sequence break and get the Morph Ball bombs. There is this creature that was an experiment that you have to fight late into the game. And it's one of my favorite boss fights in the game. It's this massive, intimidating thing you have to fight. But I recently discovered that if you use your Shine Spark and Speed Booster, you can actually get a one-shot kill on this enemy as well. So they have actually programmed in some pretty cool, fun little unique moments for a few of these boss fights that we may end up discovering a few more as we progress with playing Metroid Dread. But let's ignore the one-shot kills, just the boss fights themselves. They have multiple phases, they have multiple patterns that seem very challenging, almost impossible at first. But whenever you die, the game has loading screens, and one of the messages in loading screens say that there is no unavoidable attack. Pay attention, watch the pattern, and you will figure it out. Something along those lines the game tells you. And it's true. And you usually can just jump right back in because the respawn points are right beforehand. And you can learn. You have an opportunity to learn and get better. And once you finally beat these epic, enormous bosses, you're usually rewarded with some sort of epic, cool cutscene of Samus taking them out. They've really characterized Samus in a very effective, badass way. And seeing her sometimes counter or parry these boss fights to get into cool cutscenes where we can shoot a whole bunch of missiles at them dynamically as we see Samus doing some sort of badassery, ultimately so we can successfully take out the boss. It fits a beautiful sort of idea of Samus, and it also helps for us to have these amazing set pieces and boss fights that are incredibly satisfying. I understand I sound very, very complimentary of this game, but as the video suggests, this is my favorite game of the year, and I really don't feel like I'm exaggerating here. Like, play the game, look at some of the footage I'm showing you. Like, there's just some really cool looking stuff here. Visually, the boss fights are awesome. Challenge-wise, they are very satisfying, and there's just some pretty cool little themes and moments here that I think a lot of people are going to be hyped about. But this idea of Samus and her badassery and her character sort of play into this dread element I've been talking about, this big sort of theme of the game, because it goes beyond just the Emmy. As you progress in the game, there's a moment where things change dramatically, and it has to do with the X-Parasite. Basically, the X-Parasites get released all throughout the world, and this entire world you've been exploring this entire time has a dramatic change. It changes all the enemies that you were dealing with beforehand, and they're now all possessed by the X-Parasite. But also, this X-Parasite leads to some environmental changes as well, so you'll be going through different areas that are now different now. Some areas frozen over because of the X-Parasite, and that's basically because the X-Parasite consumes some creature, and that creature messes with some sort of big important element of the world. It's just an amazing sort of set piece here when you see the X-Parasites flying around and you see all the changes to this world you've already been exploring for hours. It's pretty hectic. And it sort of plays into this idea of dread, I would say, because now there's this even bigger threat going around the X-Parasites. Everything has been consumed and destroyed and possessed by these X-Parasites, and they are creating even more powerful, scary, intimidating creatures. And that's just awesome. That's just epic. But there's a particular moment in the game that I think is very heartwarming and epic, but then also sort of steers you down this sense of dread, I would say. And that's the moment you meet the living Chozo. Now, technically, there's two different Chozo in the game. There is Ravenbeak, but then there's also Quiet Robe. Quiet Robe is the good, peaceful one, and you meet him when you're about to be annihilated by an Emmy, but he saves you because he turns off the computer on the Emmy. And at this point, you think, the Emmy are deactivated for a while, but you know how these things go. Bad things occur. But this moment, this cutscene you have with this Chozo is really cool because it's the first moment in Metroid history where we see a living Chozo. And he talks to you in Chozo language, a beautifully crafted original Chozo language for this game, actual voiced over dialogue. And what was interesting about it is that it felt almost a little bit like Spanish, which kind of makes sense because Mercury Steam is a Spanish developer, but as someone who has Hispanic heritage, who speaks Spanish, that kind of spoke to me a little bit. I kind of appreciated it. Hearing the Chozo talk in that way was really nice to see. It almost sort of implies there's a bit of a Hispanic inspiration. I mean, obviously there is, because it's not an implication, it's obvious because Mercury Steam is Spanish, but they've sort of added a little taste there, which I really liked. And the way they talked, the way the Chozo talked was just incredible. To see a living Chozo, to see the animations and facial expressions of this creature, they did it beautifully well. But the Chozo is explaining to you what's going on here, and ultimately he tells you something that we had been theorizing for a while. Actually, pretty much everything in Metroid Dread, based off the reports, I think Brandon and I theorized pretty much. We were pretty close here, save for some minor little differences. But anyway, there's this moment where Quiet Robe tells you that Ravenbeak's plan is to extract the DNA from Samus, the Metroid DNA from Samus that she got from Metroid Fusion so she could survive from the X, and it's because Ravenbeak wants to revive the Metroid species. And then at this moment, we hear another Chozo voice. And at first I was like, why does this voice sound different than Quiet Robe? Why does it sound somewhat feminine but strong? And then I realized that was Samus talking in Chozo. And it was a very powerful moment. The way Samus sounded, she sounded perfect. Like, she sounded the way I would imagine a Samus to sound, like this very strong, strong, feminine character who is going to absolutely save the day. Like, there's just a certain strength there to this character, and I think the voice actors did an amazing job here in this particular moment. It was an epic moment, and what I appreciated about it is that it's not like we saw Samus or heard Samus talking throughout the entire game. It was just one moment. It was one pivotal moment in the game, and it was huge. As a longtime Metroid fan, to finally hear Samus talk in this way, speaking the Chozo language and the Chozo tongue with a living Chozo that's been so expertly animated that feels like a real-life living creature for the first time ever. It's just a huge moment that it's just a huge payoff for longtime Metroid fans. But even if you're not a Metroid fan, I feel like you'll see this moment and you'll be like, wow, she just talked. That's kind of cool. It's just an awesome thing. But then immediately after this incredibly special moment with the beautiful Metroid theme playing, the Chozo's taken out. Quiet Robe is slayed by this Chozo robot warrior that you have to fight, and you're just thrown right into combat again. And it's just sort of exemplary of this big transition with Quiet Robe being taken out and these Chozo warriors that you now have to deal with, and the X-Parasites coming over the entire planet. There's this big transition midway through the game where it feels like there's a bit of a difficulty spike, where you're just simply forced into more combat situations, which I really liked. There's a bit of a Dark Souls-like vibe here where you have to really think about your pacing and your spacing between the enemy and timing your attacks, and if you fail, you are punished heavily for it, but if you adjust to the pattern, you can take them out. And it's just very satisfying to have all these cool duels and fighting moments with all these different Chozo warriors. It's a nice change of pace once we get to that point in the game, and it's epic, but at the same time it does sort of add to that dread element because Quiet Robe has been taken out. The X-Parasites have consumed everything. All these Chozo warriors are not actually Chozo warriors, but old Chozo warriors that were taken over by the X-Parasite. So they have a bit of a crazy, monstrous side to them that is terrifying. And they're all over the place. You don't know when they'll come at you next, and that is pretty awesome. So then you progress through this game fighting all these amazing enemies and exploring more, seeing more of this beautiful world, having those moments with Adam, who's just a great companion character who you only speak to occasionally and offers you some insight in terms of what's going on with the world and the story, but it's not in a way that's hand-holdy like in Metroid Fusion, and it's just nice to hear him occasionally when you do. And I think that's good to just keep it at occasional, because a big part of Metroid is about the isolation, the atmosphere. And that's something I really appreciate here. And it's something I really appreciate about the character of Samus. She is a loner. She gets the job done on her own, but she's still a good person. She still does everything she can to fight for justice and just do all of that. But she's so strong. And, you know, just as a personal thing, you know, I personally deal with, you know, being on my own a lot, and seeing this character dealing with that, it's something that, you know, I resonate a little bit with. It's something I appreciate here. So it's just awesome. It's just awesome to see her explore this world, deal with this dread, and triumph. It's just an awesome, awesome thing to sort of experience. But then we get to the final stretch of the game. And there's this moment where you finally get to the final Emmy. And it comes at you, and you think you're screwed. But it's a cutscene, so you imagine, oh, well, this is a cutscene, I can't just die just like that, right? And what you realize, unlike the previous 6 Emmy where you stood no chance of fending them off, you are fending off this final Emmy. You are holding off its weird sort of stabbing, DNA extracting horn thing, and there's this weird energy that's sort of going through. And then before you know it, Samus takes down the Emmy with her bare hands. And it's this big moment because it's an implication that Samus has been getting stronger throughout the game. This special power has been building up. That's why she survived the initial attack from Ravenbeak from the very beginning moments of the game. And you don't know what's going on, but you've established some sort of new power that gives you the ability to take out a whole bunch of enemies. And you then fight a Chozo warrior immediately after, and it devolves into its crazy X-Parasite crazed form, and then when you parry it down, you just suck out the energy from it. And what this moment is representative of is Samus fully realizing her powers as a Metroid, because she has Metroid DNA. She is why Ravenbeak tricked her to come onto planet ZDR. She is why the Emmy are running around trying to extract DNA from her, because she has Metroid DNA and Ravenbeak wants to bring back the Metroid species to take over the universe, or to have a strong power to protect the universe, quote unquote. And that's just a cool moment here, that Samus has reached this point where she is the Metroid. And what's special about that is that Metroid means warrior. And that's just an epic thing to see Samus, the ultimate warrior, maturing into a fully powered Metroid, quote unquote, which is a warrior because of her Metroid DNA. And it may seem a little strange because when we've seen the Metroids, they're these weird like creatures, but the idea of the Metroid is to be a warrior to combat the X-Parasite. That's why they were created by the Chozo, and they have the ability to suck out life energy, and that's everything Samus is at this point in the game. And just a bit after this moment, you are made aware that you are finally ready to take on Ravenbeak and finally conclude all of this conflict. So then you go on to face Ravenbeak, and when you do, you speak to Adam one more time, confirms everything there, but then all of a sudden there's this transition, and Adam starts to say this is all part of the plan, supposedly, at least in Adam's voice. And then Samus is like, no, hold up, something's going on here, and she blasts it away, and you see Ravenbeak talking in his more darker, brooding Chozo language voice, and he talks about how Samus is her daughter. Basically, Ravenbeak's DNA was put into Samus as well. It wasn't just Toha Chozo DNA put in that allowed her to control Metroids, but also the Mockin DNA that gives her such incredible combat ability, and that's what sort of all culminated together with this Metroid DNA, this Toha DNA, this Mockin DNA, and the X-Parasite. It's all come together to become what Samus is at this point in time. And yes, she's also human as well, so but not anymore because of everything else. But you get to this moment, and Ravenbeak's talking about how you're her daughter because of the DNA thing, and this is all part of his plan to get you to this point so you could become the ultimate Metroid and he can use you. But then obviously Samus is not okay with that, and they go into this epic battle. It's a beautiful moment. There's this one moment where Ravenbeak brings out his wings, and you're like, oh my god, he's like this evil dark angel, and you fight him, you take him down, and you think you take him down at least, but then he grabs you by the neck again, just like at the beginning of the game, and Samus is losing strength. It's all so beautifully animated, and you're like, whoa, Samus lost. But then all of a sudden she goes batshit crazy, screaming with so much strength and ferocity. She transforms. She stabs Ravenbeak's eye where she had cracked his mask from the beginning of the game, and she's just sucking out all of his energy, all the energy from the flying ship that is the final stage for the final boss fight. You see the camera pan out to where the ship's sort of slowly falling, but them sort of having this final conflict where she's just grabbing at him for dear, ferocious life, screaming, which is just an epic thing because Samus is a quiet character, but here in this moment you see her screaming, doing everything she can, going crazy on him, showing so much power, and then everything crashes, and then you guys are here on this surface area that's everything is destroyed, and Samus is transformed as this weird sort of like alien Metroid suit armor, and she has incredible power. But then X-Parasite consumes Ravenbeak in his final moments, and he becomes this weird dead corpse of Kraid that's a parasite, but also Ravenbeak at the same time. It's just charging at you, and you have this one final behind the back third person camera moment similar to when you fought the Emmy, where you have to shoot this giant red laser to take out this weird Kraid corpse X-Parasite Ravenbeak boss, and it's just an epic thing. And then right after that there's this big sort of like escape the planet moment. You have 3 minutes, you have these new powers, you run through everything, and then you get into the ship, and then you hear Adam's voice saying, hey, your Metroid powers will destroy the ship. And then you turn around, and then you see Quiet Robe, the character you thought was dead but was consumed by an X-Parasite later on. You see it there and you're like, oh god, what's going on here? Why is this dead Chozo zombie X-Parasite thing in my ship? But then he bows to you, and it's just this moment where he dissipates peacefully, thankful for you making good on your promise and ending all the conflict of the Chozo. And then he turns into an X-Parasite, it goes into your arm, and it seems to cease your crazed Metroid powers, at least put it at balance, and then you can escape before the planet blows up. And it's just a beautiful ending sequence. And at the end of it all, I was left just like speechless, impacted. It was just a lot of crazy moments to see that you actually had shared DNA with Ravenbeak, to see that in a way you were sort of the daughter of Ravenbeak, but not entirely, to see this big moment where Samus is screaming, going all out, becoming a Metroid, making good on her Metroid DNA, coming full circle with the entire Metroid story, becoming the final Metroid, which is representative of the name Warrior, and ending all this internal conflict of the Chozo, the tribes that raised her. And then seeing that final Chozo, even though consumed by an X-Parasite, have this final moment of good where he restrains the Metroid powers and passes on and says thank you. It's powerful, and it's just something that if you're a longtime Metroid fan, you're going to be really satisfied with. Maybe if you're not a longtime Metroid fan, these moments won't hit you as hard. But it's very clearly beautifully animated, incredibly epic, and it's just cool to see. I felt like the story beats were hit really hard, and considering the gameplay and the structure and the challenge and the environments and the visuals and everything just coming together, Metroid Dread was expertly crafted, and it had some seriously powerful, impactful moments, and the game has resonated with me significantly. I love Metroid Dread. It's an incredible game. I will be playing it for years to come. I think the success of Metroid Dread will certainly stir up some momentum here. I think, you know, with the rumors of a Metroid Prime remake next year and hopefully Prime 4 after that, and maybe by that point we get another 2D Metroid remake or some sort of cool spin-off, we start to see more frequent Metroid games. It doesn't seem like we're gonna have to wait another 19 years for a brand new 2D Metroid, and I think that's exciting because what I got here with Metroid Dread was something special. Modern Metroid is awesome. I hope we get more, but at least for now, for this year, Metroid Dread is my favorite game. But what do you guys think? How do you guys feel about Metroid Dread? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.